Welcome back to a lesson about the Umayyads, the first dynasty of the medieval Islamic world, the first dynasty of Islam, and the first transformation after these first four kind of leaders, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali, that emerged after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So by the time Ali gets assassinated by a disgruntled follower, Khariji, in 661, it's been about 29 years since the Prophet Muhammad died. But after this figure, basically there will be a dynasty. So these four men are chosen essentially by election, sort of consensus process amongst leaders of the Muslim community and especially the Quraysh. But after that, it's going to end up in a dynasty. That is, power is going to move from father to son, or to uncles or whatever within the male members of that family. Now, as we pointed out, this all started because of a civil war, what's called a fitna, that lasted about 6 years, a very traumatic event in this Muslim community, a fight between Muawiyah and Ali over the leadership of the Islamic polity, which technically was about righting the wrong of Uthman's murder, even though no one had actually helped Uthman or defended him from the troops that ultimately murdered him. So the person that wins out is this figure, Muawiyah, but it was kind of an unexpected turn of events because the person who had the most support and had been winning the battles was Ali. He had support from the people in the Amsar, in the garrison towns, places like Kufa and Fustat and Basra, and he had a support from the helpers in Medina. And in the Battle of the Camel, as we pointed out, he wins over the main opponents, like Aisha, the former wife of the Prophet Muhammad, the widow of the Prophet Muhammad, and he puts them to rest, and then he turns his forces against Muawiyah, the relative of Uthman, and marches towards Syria, where they fight in Siffin. And at that point, Muawiyah smartly asks for arbitration. Both sides go home. They agreed to meet later, but in the end, this creates a break, right? As we talked about, there is this group called the Kharijites, the Khawarij, ultra-pious believers. They really don't think that this should have been left to arbitration because that is breaking with God's capacity to judge what is happening in this world. So they basically argued not only that the people who weren't pious, who weren't part of the believers, were just bad believers. They argued that the non-pious were actually unbelievers, that they deserved to be attacked and destroyed, and that's ultimately what ended up happening with Ali. But in any case, these figures actually formed a group, and they formed a faction, and they met militarily with the armies of Ali. So Ali at this point had to actually send out a side expedition, put down their armies, kill them in Nahrawan, but ultimately they would murder Ali in 661 after Friday prayers. And because of this arbitration, because of this breakup in his coalition, Ali actually has very difficulty mobilizing the troops to reconfront Muawiyah, and ultimately, because he's assassinated, Muawiyah is left with political control of the community. Now, at this point, there is a lot of different ideas about what are the criteria for leadership in the community. In this Islamic polity, in this polity of believers, what is it that actually makes a good leader? Is it piety, right? Who is the most pious? Who's the best believer? Who follows the instructions of the Quran or the example of Prophet Muhammad most closely and is working towards, the soon-to-come apocalypse and achieving that? Because in that case, it could be anyone, right? It could be someone who was a close follower of the Prophet Muhammad early on, or it could be someone who joined the movement later but is very pious at this point. It could be precedents. It could another criteria is precedents. Those who followed Muhammad early on, when it wasn't clear that he was going to win, obviously showed their loyalty and tested their mettle, and therefore they should have a bigger say and a larger claim for leadership. The other idea, of course, is kinship. If the Prophet Muhammad is a prophet, if he was chosen to receive this last word of God, then obviously those that are in his family have some sort of special ties to him. But of course, he only had one adult daughter, Fatima, and she was married to Ali, and therefore, by kinship, we're thinking really about people that are in his family and therefore supporters of Ali. But of course, some people also married into his family in different ways. And finally, there's the idea, of course, of pragmatism, effectiveness. Who is actually the best leader? Who can govern the best? Who can win militarily? Who could be the best possible leader for this community that's no longer just a small community, but is actually a small budding empire? Now, I do want to point out again, the first few figures, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali, who followed after the Prophet Muhammad, in many ways they embodied a group of these different traits, right? Both they had precedents, they had connections to the family. They were also very early followers. They were very pious, so they had it all. And that's why I think they were all elected by, to some degree, some consensus amongst the elders at that time. In later retellings, because the civil war was seen as so destructive and such a break in the community, and so many companions of the Prophet Muhammad died in it, this period was seen as a sort of pristine period, right, when everyone agreed and the succession was clear, etc. And so in the 9th century, so in the 800s, so 150 years, 200 years afterwards, they started calling this period and these rulers the Rashidun, the four rightly guided leaders. But at this period, we don't have that. But let's figure out, what is Muawiyah doing? Muawiyah is, again, the guy who wins out. He was the governor of Damascus, relative of Uthman. Probably pretty young when the Prophet died, but came to work as a deputy general and participate in the different conquests. He starts off, his family is called the Umayyads, and therefore rendered into kind of Latin, it's called the Umayyads. That's how we call the dynasty. And he basically sets up the first dynasty of the Islamic world, of this sort of Islamic empire at this time. And he moves the capital first away from Medina and goes to Damascus. Okay, and Syria is really his base of operations. He was already governor there. He was already leading conquest there. That's where he has the closest support. And interesting enough, he starts transforming this polity away from just kind of this expansions collection of nomads moving further and further out and taking it into an actual governed place, right? Campaigns are no longer just random wherever they meeting enemies on the battlefield, but they're purposeful campaigns set out to take over certain areas, to meet people, to create certain political conditions. And he supports his followers by giving out royal estates and personal things. And in fact, that's why he's putting on his name on the first coin, which we can see here. This is actually a Sasanian model of a coin, right? So this is still a place in what they have not decided to create their own imagery on their coins. They're still basically using the Sasanian models, Sasanian formats, but they're changing them a bit. So you actually have the Sasanian king, Iranian king here, and on it you have a bit of Arabic on the side, but you still have actually Persian and other stuff, and you still have the priestesses or a fire temple on the other side. So I think it's interesting that even at this point, we're kind of 50 years since the start of Islam, you still have clear imperial imagery from another empire being used on the coinage. But the important point here is that he's actually putting his name on this coin and he's attaching his rulership to the coin. Coins are very helpful because everyone uses them, and if you try to read them, it's a good way of getting a message out to everyone in a time when it was very hard to get messages out. There was no print, there was no broadcasting. Coins are a great way of getting your ideas about what it is your rule is and what's important. So at this point, what's important, what's not important is the image here, right? They're a continuation of the Sasanians, but he is putting his name on there. Similarly, when we look at the conquest, they're expanding further and further. This is the initial conquest were to Egypt and to Syria and to Iraq, and now in this period afterwards, they're moving further into Iran, Central Asia, North Africa, and there's also moments of attack into Anatolia. Eventually, what will end up happening, kind of by the height of the Umayyads, is that there is something called a sort of Islamic empire, the one and only time. It's all of this area, the Muslim world, is under one political leadership, and it's actually crazy that from basically Spain all the way to Uzbekistan down to what's today Pakistan, you have kind of one united area. Of course, the rulers in Spain basically were in very indirect contact with the ruler, with the home base in Damascus or elsewhere. Maybe they got some messages a few times a year, but it's interesting. This was all under one rule about now at this point, kind of 100 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. I do want to point out that there were actually the kind of frontier emerged between the Byzantines here in Anatolia and in the Islamic Empire in Iraq. But there were attempts to conquer also the Byzantines. One figure named Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who was probably a child or very young at the time of the Prophet Muhammad's death, led a campaign against the Byzantines, and he actually apparently marched onto Constantinople and apparently died outside of its walls. His tomb was later rediscovered when the Ottomans took over Constantinople finally in 1453, so about 800 years after the fact. And they kind of, a dream was given and the location of his grave was found, and they built a major site there, which you can still see today, and you can still go see his tomb, which is still decorated in nice Ottoman era tiling. But I do want to point out the fact that still at this point, under the Umayyads, most of the inhabitants are Christians, right? Most of this new Islamic empire is not really that interested in converting people to Islam. In fact, it's still really a believer community, especially in this early period. Christians could, of course, still be very much part of this world, be part of the believer community. They didn't need to formally convert into Islam. And in fact, at this point, to run this empire, most of local administration is still basically Christian, or Zoroastrian in the case of Iraq and Persia. Right, so the chief finance officer is Sergius bin Mansur. He's a Syrian Christian, maybe has some Arab background, but Christian nonetheless. And in fact, Muslim leaders like Muawiyah and others basically patronize Christian sites. They come to Christian sites like Gethsemane, Golgotha, the Tomb of Mary, etc., and they actually pray there, they visit there. And it's just like the continuation of how they were using churches as sites of prayer before, because they were seen as common parts of this larger believer movement. We can see this as part of ecumenicalism, that is a broader vision of what Islam could be, that included a lot of different other monotheistic religious traditions at the time. Or it could be that he's now taking on the image of the Byzantine emperor and doing things that the Byzantines used to do as well. Lastly but not least, they also, of course, intermarried with important Christian tribes, Syrian Arab tribes of the Qalb and the Ghassan, and these were Christian tribes, and they basically integrated with them as well. And we find actually even renovations of baths and so forth. We have Greek inscriptions at that time from Muawiyah of important sites. So for the most part, life is continuing on. Christians are still living. They're still writing everything in Greek. At this initial period, the chancellery, right, all the documents are still being made in Greek and not in Arabic. It would take at least another 100 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad until things shift over. Now, long story short, Muawiyah eventually dies after about 20 years of reign. But at this point, there is a discussion. What's going to end up happening? There's going to be a second civil war that ends up breaking out because there's no clear ruler, and instead, yes, Muawiyah has not yet formally established a dynasty, right? At this point, he's just the guy that kind of took over power once Ali died. But he is trying to push to the degree that he could. His own son, Yazid, who has his power base in Syria, to be the next ruler. But there's other people, for example, Hussein bin Ali's son, basically with supporters in Kufa says, I'm the Prophet's grandson, I should be the next leader. And then there's other early figures like Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, who says, those who are the most pious should be rulers. So again, we have a different group. We have dynastic lineage or efficacy as the criteria for rule. We have people who, like Hussein, who say, no, I'm part of the family, and that lineage, that personal lineage to Prophet Muhammad is the most important. Other people say that piety is the most important in precedence. And ultimately, as we'll see, this results in the murder of the Prophet's grandson in this battle of Karbala, but that's a different story for another future lesson.